Hello, we are KnightVision Consulting, and today we would like to present our approach to the Feeding 9 Billion case competition. Currently, many Indigenous communities in remote areas experience food insecurity. For example, the mostly Inuit 141-member community of Grise Fiord, located north of the Arctic Circle in Nunavut, is extremely isolated, relying on air transportation for at least 8 months of the year. The question then becomes, how can we take the food insecurity within these remote Indigenous communities and turn that into food sovereignty? To assess our proposal, we utilize the 4 pillars of food security, 3 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and 2 calls to action identified by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The 4 pillars of food security are availability. Is there a consistent supply of food to be obtained? Access. Are there barriers preventing people from obtaining this food? Stability. Is nutrition limited by inconsistent access to food? And utilization. Is the food used to its full potential?
Our project should incorporate number 14, section 4 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's calls to action, recognizing that preserving, revitalizing, and strengthening Indigenous cultures are best managed by Indigenous communities. This will require ongoing consultations and allowing them control over the direction of the project. Ultimately, our project should contribute towards Call to Action 19, closing the gaps in health outcomes between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. In particular, having readily available and affordable produce will encourage a healthy diet, which contributes to physical and mental health. Keeping the UN Sustainable Development Goals in mind, our main focus is to decrease food insecurity in remote Indigenous communities by increasing self-reliance, which should improve the health and well-being of these peoples.
There are 3 possible approaches we can take to bring food into these communities: flying food in on planes, implementing self-sustaining greenhouses, or rebuilding roads to communities that are generally inaccessible by vehicle. We assessed each of these options against each of the criteria using a 10-point scale. The results show that over the short term, using planes to transport food is the most feasible option, being much more reliable than roads that are often inaccessible due to a quickly changing climate. However, greenhouses are the most sustainable option and will align with the longer-term goals better. This results in our proposal. Planes to fly food directly to communities will be implemented in the short term. Meanwhile, in the long term, communities can begin to install greenhouses made by shipping containers, a popular technology proven to effectively grow produce even in Arctic climates. These 2 methods will come together in community markets. The food, whether imported or locally grown, will be sold by community members with no price markups. Planes are vital in this strategy because they allow food to be transported to communities where there is no road access. Partnering with wholesalers means that staple foods that cannot be produced locally can be imported as needed. To reduce the number of trips taken and hence the environmental footprint, planes can visit several communities on one trip to ensure logistic efficiency. Container greenhouses are the most sustainable long-term option for communities in which fresh produce cannot be grown due to the northern climate. These greenhouses allow for community connection, providing gardening jobs, educating youth in these regions about traditional practices, and aligning with decolonization goals, as these communities are able to be less dependent on external sources for some of their food. It is a feasible long-term solution because once installed, these greenhouses can be used for a very long time. It will create less waste than overpriced produce sitting on supermarket shelves because each community can tailor their crops to the exact kind of food they need. Everything will be fresh and local. The community market is what ties these 2 methods of obtaining food together and creates a way to affordably distribute the food to the community. In a 2013 study by BMC Public Health, during times of food shortages, many members from northern Indigenous communities say that food sharing with family was the most common, followed by food sharing between community members. Therefore, this is a practice that is already common, so this initiative can help make food sharing even more of a norm. Because food from planes will be bought directly from wholesalers, nothing will be marked up immensely in price to generate profits for these grocery stores. And because the entire initiative will be community run, it will generate business opportunities and funnel money back into the region.
Shown here is our timeline for our proposal. The first stage before any action starts with consulting the Indigenous communities on the best course of action. In the first year, we will continue to use planes to ship. At the same time, we will start to consult local communities about establishing our community market plan and get that running. After it has been successfully run for a couple months, we will then work on sourcing greenhouses for a greenhouse plan. We estimate that it will take several months to integrate and operate the greenhouses at full capacity.
We conducted some basic financial analysis on our 2 recommendations. There's a $200 million Indigenous Community Support Fund delivered in fall 2021 from the Government of Canada to implement community-based solutions to things such as food insecurity. According to Grocer, a Canadian container farm company, a single greenhouse would cost $202,000 plus freight. These containers have a 30-year lifespan and low maintenance costs. The chartered planes fly out with goods purchased through wholesalers that are then sold in the community market. The community-based approach reduces costs because the community is paying the prices seen in the city, then paying their own transportation, and then selling the goods at cost. This effort is to reduce the exorbitant increase in price to fly goods to remote communities by cutting out the for-profit grocery store and taking a community-based approach. We have identified 3 risks with our recommendations and 3 ways to mitigate those risks. The greenhouses being ineffective is a low probability, high impact occurrence. One way to combat this is to implement scientifically backed technologies like hydroponic technology to be able to grow crops in any conditions. To reduce the effects of weather on the plains, communities should have frequent shipments and community education on food preservation. The final risk is the cost of the greenhouses, and to mitigate this, Indigenous communities can introduce the greenhouses slowly and secure funding from climate-driven sources to supplement the $200 million Indigenous Community Support Fund. That marks the end of our presentation. Thank you all for taking the time to watch.